Great. All right, so my name is Molly Jane. I'm the opinion editor of Blockworks, and I'm here to welcome you all today to our panel on how to cover a beat in crypto journalism. So this panel is brought to you by the ACGR and Permissionless with our sponsors Filecoin and IPFS, but more importantly, our 5 panelists. So maybe you guys could just go and introduce yourselves in a row, and then I can get started with the questions.
I'm Brad Keuon. I'm managing editor of Tech and Protocols for Coindesk.
I'm Hannah Miller. I'm on the crypto and tech teams at Bloomberg.
I'm Wright, and I'm a policy reporter at Cointelegraph.
I'm Aleks, Gilbert, and I'm a DeFi correspondent at DL News.
Wagner. I cover policy and regulation at Blockworks.
All right, so the first question, any of you guys can take. Some of you guys work at crypto publications, one of you works at a traditional publication. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you decided what to focus on in your crypto coverage, or what you decided to focus on in your journalism in general? Why, DeFi reporter, why DeFi, for example?
Sure. I mean, for me, the decision was kind of made for me because in my year and change covering crypto industry, I've worked at publications that are focused on decentralized finance, so first at DeFi and to now at DL News. But within, the DeFi beat, I tend to write a lot about regulation and DAOs, just because I think that the lines are kind of blurred within crypto beats. There's a lot of overlap there, and I find myself gravitating toward what I think is interesting, and I think that tension between the industry and regulators is interesting, and also just the attempts to govern crypto protocols in a distributed way, which it's a hot mess, so it really makes for fertile ground for a reporter.
Well, I'll just, I was with Bloomberg for 15 years, and then I was with The Street for 4 years, so I had a pretty extensive background in covering traditional finance and markets. At some point along through that reporting, I came to the conclusion, based on my reporting, that the existing financial system was completely unsustainable. And then I learned about crypto, and I became, entranced by it. And so I started on markets coverage, and then earlier this year I started covering tech. I think it's probably, it's the best finance story there is right now. That's why I'm pursuing it.
Prior to covering crypto, I was at a trade publication focused on life insurance and annuities, which is not at all interesting. But then MassMutual made a $100 million Bitcoin purchase, and I was like, oh, this is cool. I can actually write about this. And there are a lot of use cases for blockchain with annuities tracking. So I ended up building up a little collection of clips on crypto and applied for a crypto reporter role at a publication called The Information, and took off from there, and I haven't looked back.
I was more or less a freelancer before I came with Cointelegraph, not even specifically tech or crypto, but just pitching wherever I happened to be because I traveled around a lot. And when I first started with them, I wasn't focusing on policy, but 2020, it seems like a lifetime ago. I joined right before what was called the crypto bloodbath in March 2020. I'm sure everybody remembers when it crashed. Bitcoin crashed to 3,000. So that was an interesting time to just get thrust right in the middle of things. But it was like a slow progression as I wanted to stay informed with what was going on in politics in the U.S. and just seeing regulators and lawmakers struggle to get a grasp on this. It just seemed the most interesting to me, so that's where I gravitated.
I was an intern at Bloomberg on the cross-asset team, which, as Hannah knows, covers everything. And as the college kid, they always tended to assign me the crypto-related stories. Despite my age, I really didn't know anything about it. So it's been fun to learn about. people ask if I'll kind of go back to financial journalism, which I think is funny because crypto will, in my mind, always be a part of the broader financial media landscape. And kind of switching into policy has been really fun, especially right now. There's a lot going on.
So for those of you that came from other industries, covering other industries into crypto, how long did it take you to feel comfortable covering the crypto beat, if ever you've gotten there?
My personal experience was 2 years, and then after 3 years, I thought it was 3 years, and now after 4 years, I think it's probably 6 years.
It's like about as long as it takes to learn a language.
I think it took me about 6 months to feel mostly confident in what I was doing. That said, I think that both places that I've worked now covering the industry, I think it's been really helpful to have somebody on the team who considers themselves crypto native, because I kind of like need an ombudsman, somebody that I know can take a look at the story and just make sure that whatever I wrote isn't getting some kind of weird, tiny technical detail wrong, because there's nothing that bothers folks in the industry more than getting those little technical details wrong. I mean, that is one way to quickly lose trust with folks who are actually building stuff within the industry. But I don't think that it's too different from any other beat that I've covered before this. I was working at newspapers in the South and covering education and local government, and in those roles also, it took me a couple months to really get a hang of the beat. And I mean, I think it comes back to something that's just kind of like foundational about journalism, which is that every day reporters are expected to cover things that they're not like the expert in, and we're like kind of Swiss Army knives, good at writing about like a whole range of things, but without necessarily being experts in any one thing. And I thought that the learning curve for crypto was a little bit steeper than it was for, say, education in South Carolina, but not radically so.
Yeah, I mean, things move so quickly, it's impossible to, I think, really consider yourself an expert. The industry is so incredibly broad. Even when I'm talking to people that have worked in crypto for a decade, they still don't necessarily know everything else that's happening in different realms that they're not involved in. But I do think after maybe 6 months, I definitely got better at asking the right questions and being a little bit more aware. I think when you first start out, and this probably goes for any beat, but especially with crypto, it's difficult to interview people when you really don't know anything, and fear of asking questions that seem especially stupid. So I think kind of learning a little bit has gone a long way.
Yeah, probably took me a year before I was moderately comfortable, and I'm definitely not still 100% comfortable. Even when you're dealing with what's within my beat, like straightforward cases, straightforward issues like court cases, policy decisions that will just toss out like some random tech fact, and I'll need to consult someone who's like, what implications does that have? And yeah, it's relying on the rest of the team a lot of the time, as long as you've got a good team backing you up.
Yeah, one of the things I love about the industry is that you can always learn something new. And yeah, I definitely don't feel fully comfortable because I am learning something new every single day. The other thing that really helped was, I started reporting on crypto full time during the pandemic, where I didn't really get to go to events or meet people in person. And once things, eased up and I was able to go to conferences and actually recognize faces and sit down with people one-to-one, that's when I really started feeling more confident in covering the space.
So that's actually my next question is, this industry is very online, not just because of the pandemic, just because cryptocurrency, everyone is working remotely. Like I said, even before COVID regulations, people are decentralized, there are DAOs, people are anonymous online. I'm wondering about the difficulties that you guys have faced in covering a beat that is so online, and how you've been able to establish yourself in your respective niches without ever meeting a lot of your sources, face to face.
Yeah, I think the toughest thing about it is just that covering crypto, I don't often have the opportunity to corner somebody and make them answer questions. When I was covering county commission outside of Atlanta, my last job before I got into the crypto industry. I don't think that the county commissioners particularly liked me, but they always had to answer my questions because when the meeting ended, they were just sitting up there at the lectern, and then I could run up to them and just start asking them questions, which isn't really a choice in crypto. And I mean, it just it brings the hit rate far lower, right? So I need to reach out to far more people than I was used to in my previous beats, right? Like where before I might contact 10 people, now it's like 20 because I expect, maybe a quarter of them to get back to me.
As Molly can probably attest, after 2020, I tend to know people just more by reading their names rather than their faces. And that's true for any source as well. And I think the risk like probably all of us have faced is with being such an online activity is the fact that a lot of our sources are online, even if we are speaking over the phone in those cases, that just the risk of misinformation or disinformation and just twisting whatever you want, because you rarely have the chance to confront them in person.
I'm very lucky that I live in a city where there are crypto events and things happening. So usually every week I can find something in San Francisco where I can meet people in person. And yeah, I mean, that kind of balances out as everything being so online. But yeah, I mean, I had to get comfortable with various messaging platforms. I had to really, listen in on Twitter and, try to force myself to scroll through tweets and things like that. But it definitely, I think that combined with the in-person interactions has helped me become a better reporter.
I think the real question wasn't how long did it take us to get comfortable covering crypto, but how long to get comfortable using Discord.
Someone's impersonating me there, by the way, so just report them. Just say that.
Not me yet. Should I be offended that no one's tried to scam people with my name on Discord yet?
Same, Molly. Same.
I feel like that's a sign you really made it as a reporter in crypto if someone's used your likeness to scam people out of money.
Connect your ENS to Collabland.
All right, next question. So I'm gonna jump to DeFi specifically for a bit. So with DeFi, a lot of the times, even if you go to meetups in person or go to conferences, the people that you want to talk to aren't there. They really are only online. So anyone that covers DeFi, could you talk a little bit about the difficulties of really nailing down that particular beat in crypto?
Yeah, I mean, when people aren't at conferences, and I haven't been to too many crypto conferences actually, so like the vast majority of the reporting I've done has had to be online, over the phone, messaging people on Discord, Telegram, on Twitter, and yeah, I mean, just like the challenge there, it's like what I said before, the low hit rate, it's only a small percentage of people that I reach out to get back to me, but it gets better over time as people become more familiar with you, and you kind of slowly expands that base of sources. I mean, another challenge is just whenever you're reporting on a new protocol or blockchain or whatever, and the devs, as they often are totally anonymous, just making sure that you speak to as many people as possible because, I mean, when you're talking to somebody who is anonymous, they can, like you were saying, give you bad information, and like the fact is that they might also happen to, like, an anonymous person isn't necessarily to be trusted, but they typically are also the people who have the very best information because they're the people who are actually in the trenches building this stuff. And so it's just good to make sure that you talk to a couple people, make sure that what the first person said checks out with what the second and third person says, because there's really no other way to get the story sometimes.
There's this, one thing that has been my experience is that when I log on to, my computer in my basement, I'm basically going into this parallel universe, that is the crypto universe. I've likened it to going down to the bottom of a coal mine shaft for the day. But you have to watch like TVL, you know, like that was the first sign, you know, I remember in the DeFi summer of 2020 when Compound exploded, we were watching the TVL, you know, so you watch these on-chain, these metrics, and then it's Twitter, you know, there's these dramas and you sort of pick up on them on Twitter, and then you can check the on-chain data to kind of try to verify as much as you can, and then you piece these stories together, and they're basically just these weird little dramas, and it's basically, you know, I started as a police beat reporter, and there's some crime at the heart of it.
So I just want to touch on something Aleks said about dealing with anonymous sources. I don't think all of you in your beats have to deal with them on the daily, but some of you do. What do you think is the best policy, you know, not necessarily of your organization, but just like you as a reporter for dealing with the anonymity, pseudonymity of crypto sources and making sure you're really getting things right?
Yeah, for me, it's a referral system. You know, does one of my sources know this person? You know, did they invest in their company and therefore have their identity divulged to them? You know, so it's trusting people to, you know, who I know to be good to me and refer me to, you know, people who may not be comfortable revealing their identity but still have a lot of insight into the space.
Yeah, I think even, you know, people who give you their full legal name can give you bad information or lie. And so, yeah, having that referral system, knowing that somebody is respected within the community and generally can be trusted to give you decent information. I mean, like I said before, you just often don't have a choice but to talk to people who are anonymous and who will not give you their name. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm even a little bit more cynical than that. Even with what some might consider a trusted source, even if it's referred to me, I'm not necessarily going to present what they say as truth or even necessarily quote them unless I can back it up in some other way, like on the blockchain or with a different source, definitely more than one. So yeah, trust and verify.
So another source question for those that cover policy and regulation. You know, traditionally you would be in DC, you would be knocking on doors, you would be finding politicians. What is it like covering that in crypto where maybe publications don't have the budgets to, you know, send you to DC, you're not located there, you know, what's that like?
Yeah, I live in New York, so I am a train ride away. There's a lot happening in New York, though. A lot of these court cases are being tried in the Southern District of New York. New York local state legislature has been incredibly influential and forward-thinking with a lot of their state crypto policy, similar to what we've seen in Wyoming and South Dakota and Arizona, California, Colorado. I think that in terms of covering policy, obviously being in DC for certain events is incredibly helpful, and having press credentials to go to the Hill and meet with sources is great. But a lot of times, you know, you're forming relationships with, even at the federal level, maybe your representative that is local for you, even if you're not in DC. And those relationships definitely do go a long way. And I will say, I don't deal with a lot of anonymous sources, but I do keep a lot of my sources anonymous. And I think it is very similar in terms of building that trust. They obviously are trusting me to not share where I got this information. I'm trusting that they're giving me valid information. You know, a lot of times that obviously comes with, you know, confirming it with multiple people and doing what I can to ensure that it's accurate. But I do think that there are a lot of similarities there.
And I'm based in Austin, so there's still a lot going on in Texas too. But that's part of the reason I'm here. Because I don't always travel out of state or country for different conferences or to DC or New York. I might go to New York in the near future because there is a lot going on there. There's definitely some value in being there. But I don't know if there would necessarily, I would get like a whole lot more out of my coverage if I were physically in DC, because it would still be like dealing with phone calls and emails half the time, and arranging a virtual chat is sometimes even more preferable, even if you're based in DC. And we're in the kind of industry where, unlike maybe mainstream journalism where you just want a quick soundbite from a politician. It's like, no, we want something more in depth for that. It's like, not just sell us DeFi is bad or DeFi is good.
So I'm going to jump tracks here a little bit. So when you guys were introducing yourselves and talking about your beat, I noticed that Brad and Hannah mentioned, being interested in crypto, and that's why you guys wanted to cover it. I know you didn't say you were believers in crypto. I'm noting that, but I'm wondering if you guys think it's important to believe in the future of crypto as something, as a net positive, to cover it, or whether you think it doesn't matter, you can be agnostic, you can be a skeptic, it's all just about doing your job as a reporter. Do you think there's any sort of overlap with your personal beliefs about crypto and, your day job?
I think that would be kind of like expecting somebody who covers the White House today to be a Democrat, right? I think that in fact, it might even be preferable if somebody covering the crypto industry was a little bit skeptical of it because, we've got folks in public relations, to spin industry news in a positive light, and there really aren't enough journalists to cover any industry. I think everybody knows that the number of journalists in the country is way down from where it once was, and as resources dwindle, I think that journalists have to be selective about what they cover, and oftentimes that's the stuff that you won't actually hear from the industry itself, just because like any industry, they want to project themselves in the most positive light.
I mean, just in general, as a reporter, if you believe your reporting, that will lead you somewhere. To believe in crypto, I mean, I don't know if I believe in crypto, but I believe all the stories that we've written. And that has led me to this point where I'm pretty convinced, based on my reporting, that whatever the future sort of financial system is going to be built on, it's probably more likely to be built on this stuff than the creaky stuff. So that, I don't know if I believe in it or I just kind of believe in what we've reported.
Yeah, I'm actually not allowed to hold crypto based on my publication's rules because they want us to be as unbiased as possible. That's not to say that I interact with crypto using dummy wallets and things like that, but I think it's important to be passionate about what you're covering and interested in what you're covering, but I don't know if I would use the word believe.
I'm curious, so there's a new book on crypto that came out today, Number Go Up, which I got to read and I really do recommend, from a Bloomberg journalist, Zeke Fox. And there's one small excerpt in the book when he's trying to get to an NFT party, and to buy the NFT to get in, it's a few hundred, if not a few $1,000s. And he asks for a press pass, and the thrower of the party gets very offended and says, "How can you possibly expect to write about this if you don't use it?" And Zeke's response is, well, people write about presidents and they are not presidents. People write about war and they're not soldiers. I'm wondering if you guys think it's important to experiment with crypto in order to write about it, or if you think it's perfectly acceptable to, I'm not saying not hold it, but just you don't have to use it to know it. I rambled to that there, but anyway, please take it away from me.
I think it definitely helps. I mean, interacting with the technology gives you some sort of better idea of what you should be asking and what questions you have and what concerns you might have and stuff. I do think it helps. To that point, I mean, I don't necessarily think that buying the NFT in that situation is that important, especially if it is a pricey situation. But I think that being able to relate with your sources on the level of, okay, this is a product that I've seen or I've interacted with or I've been able to use, definitely helps.
Yeah, I don't think you have to be a Bitcoin maximalist to report on Bitcoin. But there's certainly some, as I said, there's certainly some value in at least understanding the basics of the technology, just like there would be even if you're not reporting on money, you still have a wallet and still have to use it from time to time. Physical wallet's not a hot wallet. But just in terms of biases and whatnot, I think it is. I agree. I agree with Aleks here. That's a certain amount of skepticism can actually make you a more effective reporter in that regard. That everyone has biases. Whether you're gung ho about crypto or not, sometimes you will just some people are capable of just only seeing like the bright spots of that, and it goes both ways. I mean, I see a certain amount of positive reporting, not from any of us, but just in the world in general, that comes sometimes from ignorance, just as I do it from negative reporting that comes from ignorance. So it's all about healthy balance.
Yeah, I have to plug Zeke's book because he's an awesome reporter, and I'm very excited to read it. But yeah, no, I mean, I love a good demo. I love it when founders walk me through how something actually works or let me experiment with it. That helps educate me and it helps me write about it more effectively. So even if I don't own the asset, just being able to play with it online, that's great.
So speaking of that, the next thing I wanted to talk about is how you guys find stories, because what I've noticed in crypto, having been reporting here for about 5 years, is that it's an industry where new projects, whether they're real or they're fake, like to make really big promises, because the essence of crypto is to change the world. Unlike, maybe working in like food tech or something. They're not trying to change the world in the same way that crypto is. So I'm wondering, with what level of skepticism do you approach these new projects? Because if you're too skeptical, obviously you could end up writing off something huge. And if you're not skeptical enough, you could be tricked by, a fake demo. So just how do you guys deal with these giant promises that crypto, loves to make?
I try to avoid doing stories on announcements, and there are obviously exceptions to that. I mean, I think that if Gary Gensler were to announce that he's filed an application for a Bitcoin ETF, that everybody would feel obligated to write a story about that. But I think because so many of them make big promises that don't pan out, it's actually more interesting for me to just like wait a little bit and see if there are even any like preliminary signs of adoption. If whatever promise was made seems like it might actually pan out, then it might be worth revisiting. But yeah, when somebody shows up and says, "Hey, I'm about to change the world in 1 week," you just wait. It's like, all right, I'll come back in 2.
I think a lot of it kind of comes down to, I think there is a way to incorporate skepticism unbiasedly and well into your reporting. This company says they will do this. They have not done it yet. Or this company says that they will do this. This other source says that that's not possible. So, I mean, within reason, of course, but I think being transparent with your audience about the promises that are being made and what you've discovered in your reporting is essential.
One of the things, that we do is just constantly getting bombarded by a million press releases. And, it's like you're the Millennium Falcon flying through the asteroid field. And you really have to have a certain baseline of knowledge just to even be able to read the press release. And then to sort of stick to principles. Is it a name we know? Is it a big project? How much money is involved? And then a lot of it is just going to fall on the cutting room floor. But that is, that is one of the major things that we do every day, is just filtering through just the sheer mountains of information that are flying past.
Yeah, we get, I don't know how big our inboxes is at this point, but there are definitely a lot of PRs and press releases in there. And me personally, I would rather wait than be first and be right about it than be wrong and be first, even if we are able to issue a correction later, because it's hard to rebuild that trust.
So for some of you, you've been covering crypto for a while. For some of you, not quite as long. I'm curious what the differences are in covering the industry from when you started to today.
Humility. Yeah, I mean, I've worked with Seb on the markets team at Coindesk, and I think I probably came in thinking, it's maybe with more of kind of the Zeke Fox perspective of it's all just a giant scam, or it's just like a new weird thing, and I had no idea that it was, hardcore coding, creating machines, virtual machines to process, data availability and modular blockchains, stuff like that. So, it's been, a lot of humiliation along the way.
Humility, reverence, like, it's pre-COVID, it's hard to imagine the world, if we can try to remember, but I think even a few years ago, there were even more people like pointing and laughing, not within the industry, but outside the industry, mainstream adoption, just pointing and laughing at that technology. And at least from a policy perspective and among lawmakers, now there's still a lot of ignorance, but there's less ignorance than there was before.
Yeah, it's been really cool to have my grandma ask me questions and actually know what's going on. She's like, "How's your friend Sam doing?" I'm like, "Oh, please do not call him that." But yeah, no, it's been crazy too. I feel like attitudes towards the press, at least from my end, have changed. I think now in the bear market, people are less willing to talk about certain things than they were before. But yeah, it's been a wild ride.
So my first week covering the industry was the week that Terra collapsed. So I've only known the bear market. I think that things have also changed in that year and change. One of the interesting ones is that as the wrath of regulators has come down hard on the industry, that's almost had a legitimizing effect on it, because now it's okay, this is important enough for Washington to really care about it. And I think that's just been one of the more interesting developments since I've started reporting on it. Just that fact that all of this stuff is happening in Washington on the crypto front has made people, friends of mine who otherwise don't pay any attention to it, start asking me questions about crypto and what it's about and what exactly is going on.
All right, another question. So, as you guys introduced yourselves, you said, the beat that you're covering, and some of your beats were more general, crypto, and some were more specific, DeFi. I know at Blockworks we are hiring Jack, who'll be covering DAOs specifically. So I'm just wondering what you guys think about generalizing in terms of your reporting versus being really specific, because crypto, as everyone said, it's really difficult to become an expert in everything. Do you find that you prefer to sort of delve deep and just spend a lot of time in one sector? Do you prefer to be the jack of all trades, sort of covering all the different aspects from DeFi to regulation to DAOs, etc.?
If anyone thinks they know every aspect of the crypto space, raise your hand. Or blockchain. I just think it's impossible to tackle it all, honestly. DAOs, crypto, blockchain, DeFi, every bit of coding, yeah, I'd go crazy.
NFTs, that's what
NFTs,
yeah.
Just keep naming them. I'd go crazy trying to tackle it all.
Yeah, in my first crypto reporter job, I was tasked with covering the entire industry, which is too much for one person. It was extremely stressful. I felt, like I was constantly behind on everything. And in my new job, I cover crypto startups and venture capital, which is still broad, but I have teammates now who cover other parts of the industry. And having that teamwork and collaboration where we can answer questions about different things, that's made all the difference.
All right, so This is maybe kind of a loaded question, so answer it as you will. But there's definitely been an issue in the crypto media industry with outlets covering other outlets' work, because sometimes you're not first to the story. And I'm wondering how you deal with this sort of fact of life where someone else might get the scoop before you. Do you prefer to go in and get it yourself? If an outlet has covered something, even if it's right up your alley and you want to cover it, do you say, you know what, hands off, they did it first, I'm going to continue on? What are your thoughts about that, to as much as you want to share with everyone?
Now, obviously, I want to be first and best and smartest of every story I write, but you're not. I think it really depends, especially with regulation policy. There are a lot of scoops, and people get advanced copies of legislation, and people hear about things that are happening. And if I can't confirm it, and the only thing I have is this reporter from this publication says this, we probably won't do it. So it does really depend. I think the fact of the matter is no one is always first, no one is always the fastest and the most right and the best all the time. But kind of having a healthy level of this is significant enough news versus not. I mean, sometimes it's just someone got the exclusive on it, so that's a little bit of a different situation.
Yeah, my biggest bane is seeing the words, according to a person familiar with the matter. If anyone's familiar with that. If it's a big enough story, just echoing what Casey said, if it's a big enough story and it's publicly available, another outlet just happened to be first on it, we're still going to jump on it. But if it's a source that we cannot verify ourselves, obviously we'll try to reach out, but we'll try to make our own angle on it, because what's the point in being seconds to someone who covered literally the same thing? No, maybe we want a slightly different source that can provide a different perspective. But yeah.
Yeah, I'll just second that. I think the idea is, well, if somebody else did it first, then that's great. If we're coming at it second, then we'll try to do it better if we can. Do something a little bit more fleshed out.
I had an editor I used to work for at Bloomberg. His name, one of his mantras was match and dispatch. And it was just the idea that you dispassionately confirm the news that somebody else just broke, and then publish something short, and then move on. And going back to the humiliation, I mean, that's a pretty humiliating thing to do, but it's, to Turner's point, it's part of the job. You have to eat crow a lot all the time, as Casey said. You lose a lot, and you just have to accept it. And, if you can advance it, great, but that's also a resource allocation. How much more can you really add to this story where somebody else already kind of mopped the floor? You might just, if you need to say anything, either just cite them or match it and move on, or if you can, do a second day story.
So I'm going to ask about one or two more questions, and then I'll turn to the audience if you have anything, and then we have an open bar, which might be needed by the end of this day. So the next question I have is about going back a little bit to how you go about finding stories in your beat. A lot of you have spoken about finding sources, the difficulties sometimes of getting them to respond. Without sharing too much about your process to all of the competitor outlets sitting here, what do you think is the best way to find stories in your own particular niche?
I assume everybody here relies to some degree on Twitter, on governance forums, on folks they know in the industry. I mean, I think the best stories will always come from somebody who actually just reaches out to you directly and tips you off to something. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that, and I think this is one of the things that makes reporting on crypto hard, is that a lot of the interesting information out there is public. It's happening on the blockchain, and we, like crypto reporters, we're writers. We're probably not the most adept at analyzing blockchain data. We don't wake up every morning and the first thing we do is start just looking at what's happening on the blockchain, right? There are other people who are also looking at that, who are really good at just realizing what exactly is happening, and then they go and they share that on social media, right? So it's like, one of the tricky things is that good information is just out there, it's public, but it's hard to parse. Other people who are better at it are sharing it constantly, and it creates a situation where like a lot of the outlets are kind of like piranhas, just jumping on the same juicy bit of information that some anonymous person happened to share on Twitter, Discord, or what have you, and that's like part of the challenge, right? Is okay, like how do we have coverage that distinguishes us from other publications? Because like finding that stuff that isn't public but that's still really newsworthy is that's the tricky part.
Yeah, for me it's 97% sources. I talk to people all day long, and oftentimes I get story ideas from sources that don't even realize they're giving me an idea. They might mention something I hadn't heard of, or something piques my interest, and I'll be inspired to go ask someone else about it. With Twitter, it's hard. We're obviously fighting citizen journalists with handles and oftentimes a lot of misinformation. So I think obviously, speaking with people to me is number one, and not only reaching out to them when you need something, but seeing what's going on or how their new puppy is or whatever, and you can get.
I love data, so anything, like building partnerships with different data firms, and even, having a partnership where you get something on a quarterly basis. That's always really helpful for tracking trends and writing a good story. Those partnerships are some of the most vital things to my reporting.
All right, the very last question, which again can apply to anyone. So, I know you don't all cover regulation, but it's coming up on election season, for example, in the US, and so there are a lot of politicians that are giving these very quotable sort of sound bites about crypto. Then there are politicians that actually care about crypto. And just that's an example, but how do you deal with finding the people that actually are saying important things about the technology versus people that are just trying to get themselves in the media? And obviously I understand you can differentiate between people that are saying really silly things, but I think at times it probably could be a little bit more confusing to parse the people that are speaking to be quoted.
I'd like to add that this represents only my own views and not that of Cointelegraph at this time. Such a parse subject, but yes, I have had to deal with that quite a bit, and personal, I don't know how closely everyone is monitoring. Obviously, Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy have both tossed themselves into the crypto race. Speaking as a Texan personally, I don't put I get the sense, and I don't know this for a fact, that Ted Cruz seems to be more someone who just jumps on the crypto bandwagon rather than backs the technology personally, although some may disagree. So that is a huge challenge when it comes to political races, and it's only going to. I was asking Tom Emmer about this yesterday. I don't know if you caught his panel, but just asking him, just how do you think crypto is going to become more mainstream in the 2024 election? Because we've already seen 2020, I don't believe we even heard it mentioned even CBDCs or anything crypto related in the primary. So that's the fact that it's even coming up among the Republican primary is quite interesting, in fact. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. I don't, despite the fact that RFK Jr. has also tossed his hat into the ring, I don't really see it as an issue in the Democratic race, but I don't know, we'll find out. Only my own views, just saying.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is there a pattern? Has this candidate mentioned crypto at all before, or is this a one-off comment that they made at a debate or something? So definitely keeping an eye on things now is really important. I mean, we saw, I'm curious how it actually will play out on the presidential level, but with the congressional races, crypto became a huge issue for a lot of candidates. And these were candidates that have had legislation, if there were incumbents, they've had legislation on crypto, they've worked in their home states on crypto. It oftentimes was not just some new thing and some crazy opinion that they came out with out of the blue.
The most we had in 2020 was like Andrew Yang, like he was our guy, but
The Bitcoin president, I kind of forgot.
yeah, well, he dropped out pretty early, that's why.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I'm really, really curious how important it will actually be when the time comes.
I mean, it's really just Bitcoin though, right? So far, I mean, there's not much of a, RFK Jr. is also talked about Bitcoin.
Well, and CBDCs in terms of privacy and whatnot, I don't think...
Taxes also.
Taxes, yeah. RFK is like focused more on Bitcoin, but DeSantis and Ramaswamy have talked more about CBDCs. Yeah.
Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin. That's what we've reported.
Well, Ramaswamy did as
yeah.
well. Ramaswamy, but he also touched upon CBDCs. Yeah.
Well, anti-CBDCs.
Anti-CBDCs,
right.
yes.
I mean, pro-Bitcoin. And
he's talking about them, yeah.
I mean, I think that's kind of interesting to see. Specifically, they're saying Bitcoin.
It's like they don't realize there are 25,000 of their coins listed on CoinMarketCap out there.
I'm just bracing myself for more Trump NFTs.
I saw that, I think it was Tracy Wang, from formerly Coindesk, who won the phone call with him on the NFTs. I'm not sure if it's happened yet, but that was one of the things you got with the NFT. I'm sure she'll have a story about it somewhere when it eventually happens.
High utility NFT.
What else did it get you? Yeah.
Nothing. Well, I didn't expect to end it on that note, but I will. If anyone has a question from the audience, raise your hand in the air. Yes.
How do you balance the technical nature of crypto and the stories that you're writing with the knowledge and technical skill set of your audience?
Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. I think that I think all of us here are trying to write for a general audience, right? Even if it's just like people who are really interested in crypto, we're not necessarily writing for developers and developers only, right? And so I think that the challenge is just to simplify as much as possible without like introducing outright errors, right? Like some things just have to get glossed over, otherwise a story would literally be unreadable. Like every time I write about liquid staking, for example, just trying to explain exactly what liquid staking is requires 2, maybe 3 paragraphs, and I could use a whole lot more, but I think one of the things that helps is just to use analogies, right? Because like a lot of the things that you see in decentralized finance are things that exist in traditional finance, they just have different names. And so I think, even just asking the sources that I'm talking to tell me like, okay, so what is the analog in traditional finance, or what's the like, how would you explain this to your grandmother? I think help me kind of find that balance.
I mean, you definitely have to have in mind who that reader is. Sometimes it depends maybe where you work, and who are you writing for. But one thing that going back to Alex's comment about writing about DeFi, or, if you're writing some super arcane technical story about, a sequencer, in between a layer 2 and a layer 1 blockchain, that story probably should still be understandable to maybe somebody who's like a full-time Bitcoin trader. Like somebody else in the crypto industry should still be able to read that story, not just people who know that tiny little niche. Because, as we've said, it's a huge world. It's like if you're writing about some oil drill, you should be able to explain why that's interesting to somebody who's maybe, in the electricity business or something.
I will use coworkers as guinea pigs and send them little snippets of what I'm working on and be like, does this make sense to you? Or, do you understand what I'm saying here? And I'll try to pick people who maybe aren't as into crypto or as knowledgeable about the industry. So that actually really helps. And they'll do the same thing with me with their beats.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I do that with my girlfriend, and she usually gives me like a, yeah, yeah, makes sense. I'm like,
Yeah, we're really, I'm really writing for a mainstream audience. So, like even something in policy, for example, Tornado Cash, just everything going on with the regulatory environment over there. You could make a piece on that very complicated, like tracing everything back and explaining the process and exactly what happened there. But a mainstream audience probably wouldn't care, and would just need to know like the basic outline. So.
Anyone else? 1, 2. Bethany.
My one?
Yes, you're
Great, okay. I'm curious where you take your cues from when deciding what to write next. If it gets to be what you find personally very interesting, or if you're feeling that need to kind of chase whatever the hot topic currently is.
I think I think it's like it is at any other publication, right? It's like if this is really important, just like on its face, this is really important, then it's going to be the next thing that I write about. But I think that there's a difference between something that's really important and what the hot thing is, right? Because again, so much of what people who work in the industry are talking about happens on social media, and often there's going to be like the topic of the day that's being discussed, and that's not often actually worth pursuing as a story. That just happens to be like industry scuttlebutt that can play out on social media and be left alone. But otherwise, it's kind of some combination of how important is this and how much more interesting is it than the other thing in line.
Sometimes I want to write something that my editor does not agree with, so it's a fine line. I think a lot of times with big stories, it's a matter of what's next. You mentioned Tornado Cash, so they get sanctioned. Okay, what about other mixing services available in the US? What are regulators saying about mixing services? Who's funding the class action lawsuit? Why are they funding it? What's going to happen with it? So it doesn't necessarily have to be the hottest topic or the biggest story, but I think that a lot of times there are really important narratives that come out of those.
I have a lot of freedom to write about what I want, what I think is interesting, and I'm very lucky that my editors have a lot of trust in me on that. But I do love getting fun pitches from them, especially maybe ones who don't know as much about the space. Like I ended up doing a really cool story because my tech editor was like, I want to know how Lambo sales have been affected, in the bear market. So it's things like that can be really fun.
I mean, you as the we have a morning meeting, and we sort of get in and figure out what's going on, and I have a meeting with the reporters, and they have story ideas and pitches, what they're going to work on today, and we sort of work, okay, what's the angle, or what does it tell us about what's coming, and then, there's like a page 1 meeting, this is Zoom, and then the editors are like, hey, this is trending on Twitter. we don't have anything on the story, and so it's just, being in the newsroom, it's always like best laid plans and what's the highest priority right now.
Yeah, I personally don't like to jump on the scuttlebutt of what's going on crypto Twitter, but sometimes we do like to say, oh, this is what the industry is talking about. Other people should know about this too. In terms of like major policy and legal events, you can't report on those days after the fact. It's like if it's something like, oh, Sam Bankman-Fried's bail was revoked. It's like people need to know that pretty quickly. That's not something we can wait on. We can do a follow-up and we can get our own angle. And as much as I hate to say it, sometimes just having PR people just push email after email into my inbox will trigger a few ideas.
All right, number 2, Kyle.
Yeah, I just want to draw off the conversation from the panel today that was on mainstream media, that was with the Blockworks guys and the Bankless guys, where they essentially were talking about like biases in media, and like I just wanted to circle back on that and like think about like, okay, where is like a threshold on disclosures if you're an author, if you're in like your author profile, like how should a disclaimer look at the bottom of a Blockworks article if Blockworks is like participating in investment in that company? I don't know, I just think it's really curious because we don't have a standard for that in crypto. I was previously a journalist, and my author profile was always fucking lying about like what cryptos I owned, what I was engaging in. I tried my best to never write on those, but I don't know, I just think it's interesting that this is an industry that like, it's just allowable to blend, to blur that line.
I want to answer this first for a second. I think that, I think it was a point Turner made earlier, which is that if you write about finance in mainstream media, it's fine. You use money. You own a physical wallet. Thank you. Use your credit cards. So I think that there's sometimes this perception of crypto because people think of it as something a little bit wild and untamed still, that to own it, to use it, makes you inherently biased. But people that cover fashion, own clothing and wear it. I say this coming from the perspective of someone that used Bitcoin as a payment method for about 5 years. My entire salary was in Bitcoin in all my previous jobs. You don't have to rob me. I spent like all of it on like flights and food and rent. But to me, I always felt like the idea of having to disclose the crypto you owned felt a little silly, like the same way I don't want to disclose like whether I owned dollars that week or if I was in Europe, then I changed them to euros. But again, that's my very particular perspective.
I will add, Blockworks does have disclosures. They're updated extremely regularly.
Yes.
Editorial research, co-founders, I think that's it. There might be some other people. Also, something that's more internal that people might not see that I'm sure all of these publications have, there is a line between our sales team and our newsroom, our founders and our newsroom. They don't necessarily get to make the decision. They do not make the decisions. They have no say in what we cover. So I think maintaining those internal guidelines that, again, people might not always be aware of is really important.
Yeah, we also have disclosure rules, although personally I'm not holding anything at the moment. Judge me if you like. But I kind of disagree with Molly on that because hopefully none of us would be malicious about it, but we do have the ability with our outlets to affect the market like that, and I interpret it like stocks. That if one of us is so inclined, we can affect public perception, and we're not trying to. We're trying to be as unbiased as possible and just give you the news. But God forbid if something like that did happen, and we say, oh, Bitcoin is now, I don't know, what would be the most best for mainstream adoption of Bitcoin? It's like all the presidents of the world unite to convert to their countries to Bitcoin, and we just put that out, the price shoots up, we sell everything, and we're gone. Something like that.
Well, I don't want you to do that.
No, I don't think we have an intention of doing that. I just equate it to more of a conflict of interest. It's the same with lawmakers owning stocks and then legislating on that. It's like we have the ability to affect that even though we're supposed to be unbiased and subtle about it.
Yeah, I'll just say at DL News we also have a disclosure requirement. I think that at the end of the day, there is probably a point where I am so invested in crypto X that I can't reasonably be expected to objectively report on it because it would affect my material well-being if something bad happened to it. And I don't think, like you said, there are no industry standards. I don't think that anybody knows exactly where that line is, and it's why legacy publications like Bloomberg and I think I know the Wall Street Journal also don't allow their reporters to own any crypto or own any stocks because, nobody knows what that line is. If somebody picked a number, it would be totally arbitrary, and it's best just to, wash yourself of any kind of, having anybody point a finger at you and say, oh, well, your reporting was biased because, you had a little bit of this. But I think maybe challenges that the industry has found so far is to just say so-and-so has, more than X amount of this token, because, at least then you're being forward about what you have, and the reader can, decide for themselves whether they think the story was fair or not. And I think that that's like people who are news literate, which unfortunately is a very small percentage of any publication's readership, can just see how fair the sourcing was, the way everything was framed, and it's not totally unlike the fact that everybody comes to a particular beat with opinions about the players, the industry itself. Every political reporter probably, or most political reporters probably vote certain ways, but part of what makes being a reporter, tough job is that you're expected to put that aside every time you work on a story. And so, I think that happens when somebody writes a story about Bitcoin and they happen to own $5,000 worth of it.
I mean, in general, it's a complicated world, and there's conflict of interests everywhere in every line of, in every walk of life. And I think people generally accept the idea that disclosure is a good way of addressing, transparency is a good way of addressing these conflicts of interest. And in our particular case of Coindesk, we are currently owned by Digital Currency Group, which is a big player in the industry. They run the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, they own Genesis, and so yeah, I mean, we're writing about things that affect them materially, and it really interrupts the copy. We're writing a story and it's about GBTC, and we have to say, oh yeah, by the way, our owner is owns this thing. It's in parentheses. It really gunks up the copy, and yet we do it. And I think people would say, if they've observed our reporting, that we've been pretty true to the story. And we have also not received any. What I do is I make sure those stories are accurate. I make double sure those stories are accurate, but we've never pulled any punches.
It's something that the ACGR has considered in the past, that which stands for the Association of Crypto Journalists and Researchers, who floated the idea of doing a style guide, capital B Bitcoin, lowercase b Bitcoin, like a disclaimer guide. It's never been done, but that's what hopefully this nonprofit could create if people actually wanted it.
Oh, I was just going to add that if you watched the last panel, or a good example of this is just what happened at the block with the entanglements with Samping and Fried. Did it affect their journalism? Maybe, maybe not. But it was important, but it caused an uproar because people didn't know about it. So just the disclosure there probably would have been helpful.
Bessie, do you have something to add?
My only thought was also at the media panel, something I think both Mike and Jason brought up was they asked the audience who would go to CNBC or a more mainstream, media company to read crypto news, and almost nobody raised their hands. So as specific crypto native news organizations, isn't it also our responsibility as journalists to cater to an audience that is already interested in crypto? Because a comment I think that they were talking about in the panel was, these are the people that you're writing for who will then go tout crypto and blockchain to a wider audience. And if we, I guess the question is as journalists, don't you think it's also important for us to kind of be able to cater to a more crypto native audience, especially if we're saying like Cointelegraph or Coindesk,
I think if this technology is as important as people who work in the industry think it is, then the responsibility is actually not to write for them. It's to write for a more general audience, not necessarily crypto natives.
But why would a general audience be interested in this topic?
It's the future of finance.
There's a whole.
But I think that's also part of the challenge is to try and explain to the average person why they should care about it. And I think that there are different degrees here, right? Even if something is really important to the industry, it might not necessarily be important to regular people, right? Like FTX blowing up is important to regular people because a lot of them probably had money in there, right? But if, I don't know, I can't think of an example, right? But if something really important to the industry happened, that wouldn't necessarily
the Roman bridge hack.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean,
regular people didn't lose money in that. It was very specific to.
Sure. So something like that, right? I think that I think that that's a way to have kind of sub-audiences for a publication, right? Because some stories just need to be written, are important, but they really don't affect regular people except maybe in a very downstream kind of way. And in that case, then I think still you're trying to explain things in a way that most people can understand, but there's a little bit more liberty to get into the technical details because maybe you have to.
An example I was thinking of is for example, Arbitrum recently launched a program that was able to give more developers the opportunity to work on blockchain technology. It's irrelevant to a mainstream audience, but it's very relevant to the people who are working in this industry. Would you consider that something that's important to cover or not?
I think that that's a publication to publication decision, right? I don't know that that's important enough that every publication that even just covers crypto needs to write about that. And I think it's fair to write about that because that is important. But, I think just some publications really do try to cover the industry top to bottom. And in those cases, then, yeah, they absolutely should. And that is probably something that is going to be written more for developers, always with a way of trying to just kind of gesture toward regular people and say, here's why it's important, here's why you should care. But yeah, does that?
I don't want to break this up, but since this is a big dialogue, maybe people can start getting drinks. We have about 40 minutes left at the bar. Just wanted to say, and then Casey.
Yeah, no, I'm good to close it. But the only thing I'll add is, with every single industry in the world, there are trade publications. And what they cover does not necessarily impact everyone, but when there's a big enough, there's oil trade publications, they really cater to people in that industry. Okay, but when there's an oil spill, you'll still see it on CNN. So I think it's we see it, it's not crypto specific at all.
And speaking of for mainstream media here, people in the industry do read us, they do read mainstream stuff, even if they're not going to say it publicly in this kind of venue. Our crypto stories perform very well. We have readers very interested in what we have to say.
All right. I want to just say thank you to everyone for participating. We've been going on for an hour, so obviously there was a lot to say. Also just shout thank you to the ACGR, of which I'm a board member. Thank you to Permissionless, to Protocol Labs, and Falcon Foundation, and all of you guys here. Wait, let's take a quick picture. Someone in the audience. Bessie got one? Maybe one where we're standing together.